It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 25, looking at the players of Euro 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Denmark. Here we go! Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and this is Series 25 on the players of the 2024 Euro Cup. This episode covers Denmark's players. We're doing this mediacast in two parts. Part one here is a look at the candidates for the squad and their likelihood of making it. We examine the participation of players in games over the recent period and a couple of other factors to categorize them into definite, likely, possible but unlikely, seemingly off the squad, and definitely off the squad. That is kind of retired or off for a significant amount of time. Part two will come out when the squad lists are released and the final squad selected. At that time, we'll go back over the list that we create here and see who made it and who didn't. And we'll also cover things like injuries and surprise selections. So this episode will have three sections. Section 1, where we look at some general information on the team. Section 2, where we cover the main candidates in each position and their likelihood of reaching the final squad. And Section 3, where we summarize and have some concluding business. Let's begin then. We take a look in Section 1. Firstly, at some comments or notes on the squad. So we deal with some players who are off the squad here. And we don't have many. We have Daniel Wass. He had 44 caps for the national team and played from 2011 to 2022. So he hasn't officially retired, but hasn't appeared since the 2022 World Cup. The other one, I'm a bit reluctant to say add him to this section, but we will just make note. It's Martin Braithwaite. He has 69 caps and 10 goals since 2013 and has not appeared for the last 6 games. So he did start the first 2 games in 2023, but has been off the team. So maybe not off the team altogether, but a fairly significant name who's not been appearing for them recently. We still have him as an active player, as you can see by his name being in black print or black text there. So we will wait and see. Maybe this is all a horrible mistake to put him in this section. Let's try to get a sense of the kind of club affiliations that Denmark have. And basically they do play for kind of the top leagues in, well, for their top players, it tends to be other countries. And for their kind of secondary players, a lot of them in Denmark, with some of the bigger teams like Copenhagen and Brøndby. Not that many playing in Denmark, though. And we'll just look at some of the top players playing for the top teams there. So we have Andreas Christensen with Barcelona and Simon Kjær, their captain, with AC Milan, both of those central defenders. We have Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, a midfielder playing for Tottenham, and Christian Eriksen with Man United, also a midfielder. Also with Man United, the young Rasmus Højlund. He's a forward. So we won't go too much into the weeds here, but those countries kind of represented. I should say too, there's kind of an inordinate number of players playing with Brentford in England with whom they seem to have some sort of association or deal. So I think 5 players and then a couple of players who have played and have since moved on. Okay, let's go to the next section, the recent games. So we're examining the participation of players after the previous World Cup. in December of 2022. So that means games from the beginning of 2023 to March of 2024. Denmark played 12 games over that period. And we're also examining, or we will make mention of players in the tournaments that they've played in. We're not going to go too much into the weeds here, either in tournament experience or in their club history. We did do that a bit more in the 2020 World Cup preview of Denmark's players, so that is mostly still or almost completely still relevant. So if you are looking for more details, you could go back there and probably get more than we'll present here. Anyway, Denmark has been a part of the last two major cups, so that's the 2020 Euro Cup and the 2022 World Cup. Let's look at their, oops, that's in the wrong section on the graphics. Let's look at their formations over the period. So for Denmark, we are going to look at, go back to the World Cup and begin with their participation there, at least in terms of the formations. And that was three completely different formations, a 5-3-2, a 3-2-2-2, 2-1 and a 4-3-3. So really mixing things up there, and perhaps part of the reason that they struggled to get things together. Since then, it has also been a bit all over the place, but we'll summarize by saying that 40% of the times over those 15 games, that's 3 in the World Cup and 12 since, 40% of the time it's been a 4-3-3 formation, and 20% of the time a 5-3-2 formation. Otherwise, in the other 6 games, it's been 5 different formations. So still quite unsettled in terms of their formation. And we will mention too that in the last 3 games, 2 of them were quite experimental. They were both friendlies. That's the third last game and the last game. The third last game experimental, especially in the midfield. So some kind of bench players or maybe even new players brought in to get starts there. And in the final game, it was more in defense that they were experimental. Okay, the last part of this section looks at their upcoming games. So they have 2 warm-up games scheduled, both of them to take place in Denmark. So the first one is on June 5th against Sweden, and the second one is on June 8th against Norway. Bye, Joe! Have a good day! I'm just saying goodbye to my daughter who is going off to work. Okay, I should probably edit that out, but I'm not going to. I'm going to move on to section 2 and begin with some, the section 2, the main part of the media cast where we look at the players and their likelihood of making it. So we begin with the manager, and that is Kasper Hjulmand. And Kasper Hjulmand has been the manager of Denmark since 2020. So he led them through the Euro Cup in 2020. That was very successful. They reached the semi-finals there, and the World Cup in 2022, which was not successful. A disappointing exit at the group stage there. He nevertheless kept his job after that and leads them through this cup. So Kasper Hjulmand, the manager. Let's begin with the goalkeepers and begin by just listing the candidates and their likelihood. So we have Kasper Schmeichel as a definite candidate, also definite Frederick Ronno. We have a likely candidate in Mads Hermansen and a possible candidate in Andreas Hansen. Off the team is Daniel Iversen, or seemingly off the squad, and he has not appeared for the national team since being on the bench in June 2022, so kind of well off the team, Daniel Iversen. And Jonas Lossel, we'd almost say put him in the retired or gone for a significant amount of time. He was really just a backup keeper. He only actually has one cap, but last appeared for the national team on the bench in September 2021. Let's focus, though, more on the active players and the ones more likely to make it to the Cup. So we begin with Kasper Schmeichel. He is 37 years old and has been with Denmark since 2012. He has recently reached 100 caps, so on the dot at 100 caps right now, and he plays for Anderlecht in Belgium since 2022. He was with Nice in France and, of course, on the Leicester team for 11 years, the Leicester team that surprisingly won the EPL championship. So he's been around for a long time, but he was a starter in the last two tournaments. We'll keep it short there. And he has since started 11 of their 12 games and was not selected for the last match. We said that was a bit experimental in defense. So Kasper Schmeichel, a definite candidate. Frederick Ronno is the one who started that last match, but we'll give some biographical info first. Ronno is 31 years old and 8 caps, only 8 caps, so a little difficult to get caps with Schmeichel there. 8 caps since 2016 for Ronno, and he's with Union Berlin in Germany since 2021. He's been the backup keeper all the way since the 2018 World Cup, so for the last 3 tournaments. And as we saw, he started the last of their 12 games over the period since the 2022 World Cup. He was on the bench for all 11 others, so he looks like clearly like the main backup keeper. Next, we have Mads Hermansen. 23 years old and no caps for Denmark. He plays for Leicester in England, so a bit of a harking back to Schmeichel's time with Leicester, and also Daniel Iverson, who seems to be off the squad, also with Leicester, but he might be out on loan. Anyway, a big association with Leicester and Danish goalkeepers. Madsen has not been in any tournaments. He got his first appearance on the bench in March 2023. Didn't start any games, but was on the bench for all of them. So we have him as a likely candidate to make the squad. Probably won't see any field time, though. Finally, we have possible candidate Andreas Hansen, also no caps for the national team, even though he's 28 years old. And he got his first and only appearance on the bench in March of 2024. So they must have brought 4 keepers to that cup, which we've seen some teams doing nowadays. And that is it. Let's summarize the position. So Kasper Schmeichel was the starter in all 3 games of the cup, and he continued to be the starter right up until the last game. An experimental lineup where Ronno got a rare start. Okay, on to defenders, and we look at central defenders first. And we begin with Joachim Andersen, a definite candidate. And then Andreas Christensen, also definite. Simon Kjær, the captain, just a likely candidate here. And so is Yannick Vestergaard. And one more, Victor Nelson. We're looking probably at 2 or 3 positions for the Danish central defense. We go to the possible category and have one candidate there, Jacob Rasmussen. And finally, we have a player seemingly off the squad in Matthias Jorgensen. His nickname is Yanka and sometimes goes by that name. We would say seemingly off the squad, so I'll just deal with him quickly. He does have tournament experience in the last 2 tournaments, and he did play after 2. He started one of their 12 games and was on the bench for 2, but then not selected for 9 matches, including the last 8. So Matthias Jorgensen seemingly off the team. Okay, let's go back and look at these candidates. So Joachim Andersen is 28 years old and has 30 caps and no goals since 2019. And he plays for Crystal Palace in England since 2021. and he's played in France, Italy, and Netherlands as well. He was part of the last two tournaments, just as a sub in Euro 2020, but as a starter in the 2022 World Cup. And he has started 8 of their 12 games in the recent period, subbed in for for 2, and on the bench for 2. So a definite candidate there, always called up. Also definite, Andreas Christensen. He is also 28 years old, and he has 69 caps and 3 goals for the national team since 2015, and plays for Barcelona in Spain since 2022. He was with Chelsea for 8 years before that, and also part of the last 2 tournaments, the last 3, in fact. He was a starter in all 3 of them. Since the beginning of 2023, he has started 7 of their 12 games, on the bench for 2, and out with 2 separate injuries for 3 matches. That includes the last 2 matches, although he quickly recovered, missing only 1 game for his club there, so not a problem. And Andreas Christensen, a definite candidate. Simon Kerr is their captain. He's 35 years old and has 131 caps and 5 goals since 2019. Kerr plays for AC Milan in Italy since 2020 and was with Sevilla in Spain prior to that. And again, part of the last 3 tournaments as a starter. However, after game 1, he did sub out, or in game 1, he subbed out injured in the recent World Cup, and was not there for games 2 and 3. He has started 8 of their 12 games since, though, and subbed in for 1. He too out with 2 separate injuries for 3 games, including the last match, although he too has since recovered. So Simon Kerr was injured for the last month of the season, but came back as a substitute in the last match. He played just 2 minutes, so kind of coming in, if not a little bit injured, then probably a little bit unfit. So Simon Kerr, for that and other reasons, we have as a likely candidate rather than a definite, although as captain, it's probably closer to definite. Okay, next we have likely candidate in Jannik Vestergaard. So he is 31 years old, with Denmark since 2013, with 38 caps and 2 goals. And he too plays for Leicester in England, and since 2021 there, and was part of the Euro 2020. He was a substitute in game 1 and then gained a starting position, but not selected for the World Cup in 2022. After that, he returned. He had been gone for 17 months, so almost a year and a half there. Came back in November 2023 to start 2 of their remaining games, and subbed in for another. So Jannik Vestergaard coming back into the team, and maybe likely is a bit generous there. I'm actually going to change it to, and well, he started 2 games. It's arguable anyway. He was probably called in because of injuries to players who have since recovered. So that's why I'm thinking it's a bit generous. Anyway, we'll leave him where he is. We also have a likely candidate in Victor Nelson, and he is 25 years old, and he has 12 caps and no goals since 2020. And Victor Nelson plays for Galatasaray in Turkey since 2021. That is his first move out of Europe, and not selected for the Euro 2020, but a substitute in the 2022 World Cup. Sorry, I was a bit distracted because I was just checking on Vestergaard, and in fact, he started 3 games, 3 of their remaining 4 games, and subbed in for the others. So that makes the likely categorization a bit more tasteful. Back to Victor Nelson, though. So a substitute in the World Cup in 2022. He started 2 of their 12 games since then, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 7. So just one match that Victor Nelson was not called up for. So we have him as a likely candidate. Finally, Jacob Rasmussen, 27 years old and no caps for the national team. He got his first appearance on the bench in March 2024 and was on the bench for both of those games. Again, probably called in because some of the starting players were injured. So we might or might not see him. Let's go and summarize the position of central defense. It started as a 3-man central defense in the World Cup with Captain Kjær in the center and Christian alongside Christensen and Anderson. As we saw, though, Kjær got injured and he was replaced by Nelson in that 3-man defense. But in game 3, it was just Christensen and Anderson. And after that period, it varied from sometimes 2 and sometimes 3 central defenders. And really, it was the main 3 there, Kjær, Christensen and Anderson rotating, with Nilsson coming in to cover injuries, especially near the end where both Kjær and Christensen were injured for the March games. Vestergaard, as we saw, also returned near the end and did start 3 of the last 4 games. Okay, on we go to the left back position. And this has fewer candidates because there's just one position to be filled. And the first candidate is Joachim Mail, a definite candidate. And Mela, it's properly pronounced. And a likely candidate in Victor Christiansen. So let's go back and look at the candidates. We have Mela, who is 26 years old with 43 caps and 11 goals since 2020. And he plays for Wolfsburg in Germany since 2023, Atalanta in Italy before that. And he was a starter in both the previous tournaments. He impressed me in the Euro 2020, more as a winger than as a defenseman, but I think he's good in both. And was a starter in 2022, as I said. He started 9 of their 12 games since the 2022 World Cup, did Mela, and was on the bench for 2, including the last match. He was not selected for one other match too. So Mela, a definite candidate to make the squad. Victor Christiansen, though, seems to be challenging his spot. Christiansen is 21 years old and has been with Denmark since 2023 with 6 caps and no goals. Yet another player on the roster at Leicester in England since 2023. However, he has been on loan to Bologna in Italy since 2023. So Victor Christiansen, a likely candidate, and we'll summarize the position. First, let's talk about the position because it does push up to a winger role sometimes, as it does in the first 2 games of the World Cup. It did. And regardless, though, at the beginning, it was always Mela. And Mela continued in that role after the Cup. However, twice when it became a winger role rather than a left back, he was replaced. One time by the right defender Stryger Larsson and once by the right winger Robert Skov. But I did say Victor Christiansen is kind of challenging for the position. He took over for the last 4 games. Mela was benched for 2 of those games, but moved over to the right side for the other 2. So didn't lose his starting position, his start so much as his starting position. So we'll have to see in the warm-up games who starts there. I honestly would be a bit surprised if Mela was losing his position. Let's go over to right backs, and we have a likely candidate in Rasmus Christiansen. And then a possible candidate in Alexander Ba, although he is an injury doubt, which we'll talk about. We also have several other possible candidates. I just mentioned Jens Stryger Larsen, Mads Roerslev, and Elias Gillert. All of those players possible candidates. And at the beginning, we talked about Daniel Wass, who we'll put in the retired category. Actually hasn't retired from club soccer, but hasn't been called up since the 2022 World Cup. So let's look. We have Rasmus Christensen, 25 years old, 20 caps and no goals since 2021, and plays for Leeds United, or at least on their roster since 2022. Leeds United in England, but he is on loan to Roma in Italy since 2023. And this is a good time to point out that a lot of these loans that I mentioned will have ended, but we're just gonna behave as if they haven't ended because we're not really sure. Okay, so Rasmus Christensen, not selected for the 2020 Euro Cup, but a starter in the World Cup 2022. Since that time, he started 2 of their 12 games, and he was subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 2. He was injured for the last 2 matches, but has since recovered. So just 1 match that he actually wasn't selected for. And that's why we have Rasmus Christensen as a likely candidate, at least to make the squad and not necessarily to be a starter. Alexander Ba has actually started more games than Christensen, but is just a possible candidate. He's 26 years old, but only has 9 caps and 1 goal. Since his first in 2020. He plays for Benfica in Portugal and not part of the squad for Euro 2020, but subbed into or part of the 2022 World Cup as a substitute. Ba has started 3 of their 12 games since the start of 2023, was on the bench for 1, but out with 2 separate injuries for the last 6 matches and not selected for 2 others. So that's why we're not confident that he'll start. Recently, he's been out with a muscle injury since early May, and there's an unknown return date on that one. And as we saw, that's not his first injury this season. He's been struggling with that. So Alexander Ba, doubtful for this cup. Let's look at the next possible candidate. Perhaps room will open up for Jens Stryger Larsen, who is 33 years old and has 54 caps and 3 goals since 2016. He plays for Malmo in Sweden since 2024 and was in Turkey, Italy, Austria before that. So a bit of a traveler. Has been called up since for the last 3 tournaments, kind of a sub or on the bench for the last 2. He was a starter in the 2018 World Cup, actually, and he started 2 of their 12 games since the 2022 World Cup, subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 2, injured for 1. And not selected for 4 others, including the last 2 matches. So a bit of a sense that he's drifting off the team is Stryger Larsen, but still a possible candidate. Next, we have Mads Roerslev. He is 24 years old and has no caps for the national team. One of several players who plays for Brentford in England. He got his first appearance on the bench very recently in March 2023, but he didn't start either of those games, just on the bench. So Mads Roerslev, perhaps coming in because Ba is injured and Larsen not selected, seems to be the story. And the same may be true of Elias Gillert. He's 20 years old and has 3 caps since 2023 for the national team. He plays for Copenhagen in Denmark. And no, it's not the same situation for Gillert, because he got his first appearance back in March 2023, so a year before Roerslev. He started 2 games, actually, including the last one, and subbed in for 1 and was on the bench for 3. So Elias Gillert probably should be ahead of Roerslev on the list here. I'll just make that change. And those are our candidates for right back. So let's look at the situation. In the Cup, in the World Cup, it was Rasmus Christensen for all 3 games. However, he only started twice after that, and the position was very unsettled over the last year and a half. Ba played twice near the beginning, and we saw that left back Mila came over 3 times towards the end. So otherwise, 3 other players had single appearances. So a very unsettled position here. And again, it'll be interesting to look and see who takes that position in the warm-up games. That brings us to the end of defense, and we're ready to move on to the midfield. And we begin with defensive midfielders, and we have likely candidate Morten Hjulmand. That's the same name as the manager, so I was checking to see if they're related, but I didn't read anything that said they were. Anyway, he's a likely candidate, and we have Christian Norgard as a possible candidate. Let's take a look at those players. So Hjulmand is 24 years old and has 5 caps and no goals since 2023. And he plays for Sporting Lisbon in Portugal since 2023 and was with Lecce in Italy before that. Hjulmand started 2 of their 12 games since the World Cup. He was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 7 others. So that he is consistently called up is the reason we have him as a likely candidate, not because of the number of games he started, which is fairly few. Christian Norgard is 30 years old, and he has 24 caps and 1 goal since 2020, playing for Brentford in England and for quite a while, since 2019, and was with Fiorentina in Italy before that. He was selected for both of the previous tournaments, a substitute in both of those. And since the 2022 World Cup, he has started 5 of their 12 games, subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1. He also was injured for the last 2, but he's recovered. So Christian Norgard getting a few more starts, I would say, than he has in tournaments, and certainly more than Hjulmand. So, but less likely because of the participation near the end of this period. No, we won't summarize the position because we want to introduce the central midfielders first. So in the central midfield, a definite candidate in Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, and also in Christian Eriksen. We sometimes think of Eriksen as an attacking midfielder, but in this period he has played both, but he's played central midfield more. He's a definite candidate too. And we've kind of rearranged things for our narrative here. So we've moved both Matthias Jensen and Thomas Delaney to the left midfield position. Both of them, though, are coded as central midfielders. Not a lot of difference between the two. So that brings us to the possible candidate, Matt O'Reilly. And then we have Philip Billing seemingly off the squad. So he was not selected for the last 8 matches, Philip Billing. So doesn't seem to be part of their plans, but you never know. Let's go back and introduce these players a bit more. 28-year-old Pierre-Emile Højbjerg has 75 caps and 8 goals since 2014, and he is with Tottenham in England since 2020, Southampton for 4 years before that, and Bayern Munich before that. Højbjerg has been part of tournaments since the 2020 Euro Cup. He was actually on the preliminary squad for the 2018 World Cups and didn't make it. But finally, after being on the team for 6 years, he made the tournament a tournament in 2020 and was a starter. Was a starter in that and in the 2022 World Cup, and he remains a starter, starting 11 of their 12 games over the period that we're looking at, and subbed in for one other. So Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, a definite candidate. Next, Christian Eriksen. So yes, is coded as an attacking midfielder, but really is quite versatile in the midfield. Eriksen is 32 years old, and he's been on the team since 2010 with 128 caps and 40 goals. And he's been with Manchester United in England since 2022. He was also with Brentford briefly and with Inter Milan and Tottenham before that. He is a player who joined his first youth club at just 3 years of age, Christian Eriksen, and part of the last 3 tournaments actually as a starter, but kind of famously in 2020 Euro Cup, he had a heart attack on the field, and that was quite shocking. But he did recover in time for the 2022 World Cup and was a starter in that one too. Since that time, Eriksen has started 7 of their 12 games, on the bench for 1 and out with 2 separate injuries for 4 others. So Christian Eriksen, a definite candidate for this cup. All right. We move to the possible candidate, Matt O'Reilly. He was actually born in England and is 23 years old, and he has 2 caps and 0 goals since 2023. He plays for Celtic in Scotland since 2022. And O'Reilly got his first appearance on the bench in October 2023. He started 1 of their remaining 5 games there, subbed in for 1, and was on the bench for 3 others. So consistently called up since then. And that is it for our candidates for central midfielders. So now we can go back and summarize kind of the position for defensive and central midfielders. So given the formation and the variety of formations they use, the position is either 2 or 3 players. Ironically, it's not. It's never a single player formation. In the cup, it was Eriksen and Højbjerg in the World Cup in all of 3 games, but they were joined by Delaney in game 1 and Jensen in game 3. Both of those are 3-man central midfield. It was Norgard, Jensen and Højbjerg for the first 2 games after the cup, and then it went back to Eriksen and Højbjerg for 2 games. So it continues to be some arrangement of this game, and we're going to divide it further when it's a 3-man midfield. But we'll just say for these candidates, Højbjerg started 11 games, Eriksen 6, and Norgard 5. Eriksen also played 1 game as an attacking midfielder. At the end of the period, Hjulmand came in for 2 of the last 3 games. Okay, that is several players dealt with in a chunk. And we move on then to talk about when it's a 3-man midfield. In that case, we consider it kind of a one central midfielder with a left midfielder and a right midfielder, although we kind of have touched on this. So we'll just look at a couple of candidates that we moved here because they did play as left midfielders. So the first one is definite candidate Mathias Jensen, and then we have possible candidate Thomas Delaney. So Mathias Jensen is 28 years old and has 30 caps and 1 goal since 2020. He's one of several who play for Brentford in England since 2019, like the last player we saw. And Celta de Vigo in Spain before that. Jensen was selected for both the last tournaments. He was a substitute in both of them. And since the 2022 World Cup, he started 5 of their 12 games, subbing in for 3 and on the bench for 4. So again, that consistent selection makes him a definite candidate. Thomas Delaney is the possible candidate, 32 years old, with 76 caps and 8 goals since 2013. He has played for Sevilla in Spain since 2021, but he was on loan to Anderlecht in Belgium since 2023. He has been selected for the last 3 tournaments, a starter in all of them, except that he got injured in game 1 in the 2022 World Cup. I recall him falling awkwardly, and that ended his tournament. But he has come back since and started 2 of their 12 games, subbing in for 2, on the bench for 1. Not selected for 5 matches. That was the first 4 matches, perhaps related to his World Cup injury, although he wasn't listed as injured, but not selected, and then not selected for the last match. So we have Delaney as a possible candidate. Let's talk about this position of left midfield then. So actually, Matthias Jensen only was only a starter when it was a 3-man midfield. And he was a left midfielder for 4 of his 5 starts, and a right midfielder for 1 of them. Delaney played the position in 2 of the last 4 games, and those were his only starts as well. So both of them truly left midfielders in this period. On the right side, right midfielders, position-wise, it's the same story, but candidate-wise, we don't have a player who is kind of solely occupying that position, or whose only stars were in that position. So I'll just summarize the position here. Pierre-Emile Højbjerg might be here, as he played right midfielder when the position was used for most of the early period. However, Højbjerg also played in the centre and was part of a 2-man central midfield. So we left him as a central midfielder there. And he wasn't the only one in this right midfielder position. 2 other central midfielders who we've talked about also played this position over the last 2 games. Okay, we move on upfield to our new kind of organization of the pitch. We have left attackers and right attackers, so that could mean anything from a winger to an attacking midfielder to a forward in a 4-3-3 formation. So, however, with Denmark, the winger position is always played by the left back pushing up. So this position of left attackers then refers to left attacking midfielders and left forwards in a 4-3-3. First, we have Mohamed Daramy, and he is a likely candidate. Sorry, I'm lost because I have him out with a knee injury and expected back on March 30th, but I didn't see him as listed as injured. Oh yes, he is. So he is an injury doubt, and we'll cover that in a bit more detail as we go. We do have Yusuf Poulsen categorized as a left winger, but in fact we're moving him to forward because he's played that position actually on the right over this period. So next candidate then is Mikkel Damsgaard, a possible candidate. Jacob Brun-Larsen, also a candidate here, but possible but unlikely. So he was not selected for their last four matches. However, he did have a strong ending to his club season. He was on loan to Burnley from Hoffenheim in Germany. So he might have become a consideration since March. And but in terms of his record, we'll say he's possible but unlikely. No, I'm going to be bold and move him up to possible, Jacob Brun-Larsen. Okay, let's look at these candidates. Mohamed Daramy is 22 years old with 9 caps and no goals since 2021. Plays for Stade Reims in France since 2023, but was not selected for the World Cup. Since then, though, he started 2 of their 12 games, subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 4. So just 2 matches that he was not selected for, and even one of those he was with the underage team. So Mohamed Daramy did look like a likely candidate. However, he got a knee injury in late March and is not expected back until June 30th, which is around the time when the group stage finishes. So he looks like he's out of contention here, and we'll actually move him to the injured section. Next, we have Mikkel Damsgaard. He's 23 years old and has 26 caps and 4 goals since 2020. Another of those playing for Brentford in England, but came in a bit later than the ones we've seen so far. He's been there since 2022. He was selected for Euro in 2020. He actually started on the bench but gained a starting position there. But in the 2022 World Cup, Damsgaard was just mostly a substitute. He did start one game there. Since then, he has started 3 of their 12 games, subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. He was out with 2 separate injuries for 6 of the 12 matches, but he has recovered since. So Damsgaard, we have him as a possible candidate here, and let's look at the position. Basically, the position did not exist in the 5-3-2 of the first game of the cup. That's because the left back played the winger role. But in game 2, it was Damsgaard as the left attacking midfielder, and in game 3, Lindstrom as a left forward. Lindstrom we will meet shortly. So these two have appeared a couple of times each after the cup. Damsgaard was there in the last game, but otherwise it was a host of players playing in this position. So of those, attacking midfielder Lindstrom, who we've mentioned, forward Jonas Wind and Daramy each played twice. Okay, over to the right attacking midfielders, and we have no definite or likely candidates, but several possible candidates. Andreas Skov Olsen, Anders Dreyer, and Gustav Isaacson, all of those possible. Robert Skov, though, is possible but unlikely. Robert Skov was not selected for any of the last 4 matches and didn't start any games in this period, although he was part of the squad for the last 2 tournaments. So Robert Skov, possible that he'll come back, but missing the last 4 games. Let's look at the candidates who we do expect to see. So Andreas Skov Olsen is 24 years old and has 29 caps and 8 goals since 2020. He plays for Club Brugge in Belgium and was with Bologna up until 2022 when he moved to Belgium. He was selected for both of the last cups, a substitute in the Euro 2020, and a starter in 2022, although he didn't start all of the games. He has started 4 of their games since the World Cup there, but he's been out with 2 separate injuries, so a lot of injuries on Denmark. He was out for 4 games. That's the first 2 games and the last 2 games. And he was not selected for 4 other games besides. So we have him as a possible candidate here. Anders Dreyer is 26 years old, only 3 caps with the national team, and no goals since his first cap in 2021. And he has not been selected for a tournament. Indeed, he was off the team and not even a consideration for the World Cup in 2022. But he did return after a 16-month absence in March 2023 and started 1 game, the last game he started, as well as being on the bench for 5 games, but not selected for half of the games. So probably starting the last game, his best claim for selection here. Finally, in the possible category, we have Gustav Isaacson. He is 23 years old and got his first cap in 2024, and that was actually his first appearance as well. He was on the bench for the first game in 2024 and was subbed in for the other. So just a substitute appearance there, but Gustav Isaacson raising his hand for selection here. Okay, that is it, and let's summarize the position of right attacker. So same as on the left, it's either a right attacking midfield or a right forward, but not a right winger, because that's the right defender who pushes up. So the position was played of winger was a defender in the first game, and no, this position didn't exist. In game 2, it was Lindstrom as a right attacking midfielder and Skov Olsen as a right forward in game 3. So we'll get to Lindstrom soon, but Skov Olsen in game 3 of the World Cup. And it was mostly those 2 after Lindstrom and Skov Olsen. And the forward, Jonas Wind, got 2 starts on this side. Dreyer was the starter in the final game, but we did see that there was some experimentation in that game. Okay, let's go and look at the position of attacking midfielder. This is kind of odd for Denmark because it's used in some formations and not in others. And we'll get to that later. But here's where we have put Jesper Lindstrom as a possible candidate. Basically, he started twice as a left attacker and twice as a right attacker, and is coded as an attacking midfielder, although he didn't play that position in this period. Lindstrom was not selected for the 2020 Euro Cup, but he was for the World Cup. He was subbed into game 1 and then gained a starting position for the last 2 games. Since that time, Lindstrom has started 4 of their 12 games and subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1. However, he was not selected for the last 2 matches. So, wow, I can't believe I put him as likely. Because when you're not selected for games just before the cup, that is a bad sign. So I'm actually going to move him. I'm going to move him down to possible. It turns out I had not put him on the list at all, but there he is at the possible level. We also have Christian Eriksen as an attacking midfielder, but as we said, we moved him to central midfield and have talked about him. The only other candidate here is Nicolas Vallis, who is seemingly off the squad, having last appeared in September 2023. His first and only appearance was in September 2023. Okay, we'll summarize the position of attacking midfielder now. And the position was not used in the Cup, but it was in 4 of the formations that Denmark used after the Cup. And it was always a different player, mostly ones we have seen so far. So actually, Damsgaard um, started there once. Jonas Wind and Eriksson started there too. And in one case, Dolberg, who's a forward, came back to play the role. That's not true because Wind is a forward. So in two cases, it was forwards who came back to play the role. Speaking of forwards, let's move on. That's the last position we have to deal with here. And we have a definite candidate in Rasmus Højlund. A likely candidate in Jonas Wind, and also Yusuf Poulsen, likely. And we have a possible candidate in Kasper Dolberg. And we talked about Martin Braithwaite at the beginning. I personally think he is off the squad, but that doesn't count for much. We saw that he started the first two games and was not selected for the last six. So technically, seemingly off the squad. That's why I felt a bit bad presenting him more like a retired player at the beginning. But we also have another player seemingly off the squad. That's Andreas Cornelius. Both of these players were part of the last three tournaments for Denmark. But in the case of Cornelius, he's been off the team longer, has not been called up since the 2022 World Cup. Anyway, we'll go back and look at some of the players who seem more likely. Rasmus Højlund is just 21 years old and has been with Denmark since 2022 and has 12 caps and 7 goals. So a great start to his international career. Scored 7 of their 19 goals in qualification for this cup. Højlund has started 7 of their 12 games since the Cup, subbed in for 3 and injured for 2. And he plays for Manchester United in England since 2023. He was with Atalanta for a year before that, and Sturm Graz in Austria. Jonas Wind, the first of our two likely candidates, is 25 years old. And he has 26 caps and 8 goals since 2020. Wind plays for Wolfsburg in Germany since 2022 and has been selected for both of the last tournaments. Actually started and then lost his starting position in Euro 2020 and just on the bench in World Cup 2022. He had come in as an injury concern to that tournament. Wind started 7 of their 12 games since the World Cup there, and subbed in for 4 and was not selected for 1 game, but that was the last match. So a bit of a concern there, and we landed on likely as his categorization. I should say Jonas Wind's name has come up a lot. He actually played in all 3 attacking midfielder roles, so left attacker, right attacker, and central attacking midfielder. That was towards the beginning of the period, but towards the end of the period, or actually more in the middle, he was a forward, and most of his starts were as a forward. And then at the end, he just wasn't a starter. So Jonas Wind, kind of a difficult to define player here. Next, we have Yusuf Poulsen, categorized as a left winger, but we've moved him here because I wouldn't say most, because I think he only has 2. His starts have been as a forward. Anyway, let's introduce him. He's 29 years old. Yusuf Poulsen, and he has 77 caps and 12 goals since 2013, and he's been with Leipzig in Germany since 2013, so more than 10 years with them now, and was selected for all 3 of the last tournaments, a starter in the World Cup in 2018 and Euro 2022, but just on the bench in World Cup 2022, and he also had come into the tournament as an injury concern. He started 2 of their 12 games since the World Cup, subbed in for 7, and not selected for 3 matches. Those were the first 3 matches after the World Cup, perhaps dealing with his injury there. And so that leaves him for us as a likely candidate, though not a likely starter. The possible candidate is Kasper Dolberg. He's 26 years old and has 45 caps and 11 goals since 2016. And he played for Anderlecht in Belgium since 2023 and was with Nice in France before that, loaned out to a couple of teams from Nice. He's been part of the last 3 tournaments too. Basically a sub in the first 2. He actually did gain a starting position at the end of Euro 2020, and in World Cup 2022, he started in game 1, but then lost his starting position. So Kasper Dolberg making things entertaining for us. Dolberg started 3 of their 12 games since the World Cup. He subbed in for 2, was injured for the first 2 there, and not selected for 5 others. So just 5 of the 7 or 12 matches he's been involved in. So we have him as a possible candidate. Seems to be a bit in and out of the team, Kasper Dolberg. Martin Braithwaite. Okay, sorry, we've dealt with Braithwaite and Cornelius, 2 fairly big players who seem to be off the squad now, and we can go to the summary of the forward position. So it's either 1 or 2 in this position. Actually, when it is a 4-4-3, it looks like there's 3, but we view that as 1 centre forward and 2 kind of attacking, left attacking and right attacking players. That's kind of how we've organized things. Anyway, the starter for the forward varied a lot in the Cup. It was Dolberg and Skov Olsen as a pair up front in the first game, and then in the second game, Cornelius individually and Braithwaite in the third game as the sole forward. So even the formations were a bit unsettled there. Højlund, though, came in after the Cup and got off to a roaring start for Denmark, so he seized the position, but only at first. In the middle of the period, Wind came into the position. I think he started 3 games in a row. And towards the end, Højlund was there sometimes. But we do see Poulsen and Dolberg each getting 2 starts towards the end of the period. So, as we said, Højlund ultimately just started 7 of the games. And so did Wind. Although Wind was not always as a forward. Okay, that brings us to the end of our look at the players. So some closing thoughts on Denmark. They have had a lot of injuries over the period. They were really out of sorts in the World Cup. Injuries playing a role there too. Captain Simon Kjær injured early in the first game. So just a tournament that they would just as soon forget about and start anew here. But things looking a bit kind of disorganized, a lot of changing positions. We don't see a lot of consistent positions. And actually that's a good thought to move on to the next section with as we go through the players that we think will definitely be starters. So let's begin with manager Kasper Hjulmand. Things don't seem bad enough that they would consider getting rid of him at this late stage. So we'll call him a starter. Also a starter, Kasper Schmeichel. Not much doubt about that. And in fact, not much doubt that Frederick Ronno is the second string keeper there. For central defenders, who I have to go back and look at my notes here to make a good statement. It really is a rotation, though, of Joachim Andersen and Andreas Christiansen and Simon Kjær. Each of those have started about 2/3 of the games. And then Vestergaard came in towards the end. So it's kind of hard to say. I don't think we can nominate a starter, but we could probably say that those three. No, I'm not even going to say that because Vestergaard is in the picture. Nelson even comes in as a substitute sometimes. So anyway, those are the candidates, but we can't nominate a starter among them. Let's move on to the left back position. Joachim Mela was clearly a starter in the cup and going forward just in the last 3 games. In the last 4 games, some doubt as to his position. So we can't name a candidate there either as a definite starter. On the right side, it's even less settled. Rasmus Christensen, the main candidate there, but has only started 2 games. So not close to being nominated as a starter here. We have all sorts of players coming into this position. So it'll be interesting to see the friendlies before the tournament to see if there is any settling there. We go to defensive midfielders and central midfielders. So we can actually, with confidence, say Pierre-Emile Højbjerg is going to be a starter, but we don't really have one beyond him. Erik Christensen would be the next best candidate, but really he's only started 7 of their 12 games, so we don't have the confidence enough to nominate him as a starter. Over as the left midfield and left attacking. I mean, a lot of these players, we are confident they're going to be named to the squad, but we don't have a lot of confidence in starts. So none of the other central midfield candidates are really looking like they're definitely going to start. So we have to go up to the attacking midfield now. And here too, things kind of in disarray as far as a consistent starter goes. So we can't name a left attacker either. Yes, on the right side, let's see if we can see if anyone looks likely. And no, nobody on the right side either looking likely. Wow, I didn't realize it was as unsettled as it seems to be when we look for starters. If we go to the forward line, given his great performance in qualifying, probably Rasmus Højlund will be a starter, but he too only started 7 of the 12 games, so it's not enough for us to put him as a starter. And in fact, most of those starts were right at the beginning of 2023. Jonas Wind, another candidate here. We could almost nominate him as a starter, not necessarily as a forward, but somewhere at the attacking end of the field. But again, he too has only 7 games. So we're not doing well in finding starters, but I do hope this run through shows that it's been quite unsettled for Denmark, and that's probably why they didn't do well in the World Cup. So the manager really needed to settle things over the period and has a short time left to do that. Okay, let's finish with a look at injuries, a review of injuries. We don't have too many, although they have had a lot of injury problems over the period and including in the World Cup. But anyway, out of contention is left winger Mohamed Daramy. He's out with a knee injury since late March and not expected back until June 30th, well after the cup begins. Alexander Barr, though, is an unknown. He's been out with a muscle injury since early May and an unknown return date. In general, he's struggled with injury this season, but I think more of a chance of him coming back than Mohamed Daramy. But we will update those, and that's a nice transition to our closing here, where we give a quick preview of part 2, which will come out when the final squads are released. At that time, we'll pay attention to any notable non-selections, so any definite or likely players on our list who are not selected, and then any surprise inclusions, and that always includes a couple of new players, so we're looking forward to that. And of course, we'll update injuries with any further information we have. So we hope this mediacast helps you enjoy the Euro Cup more. It is more enjoyable when you know a bit more about the players coming onto the field, and we hope you join us also for part 2. We would like to thank Mike Kripak, Make Sound Music, and Pixabay for the wonderful background music called Dance 90s accompanying this mediacast.